The Canada-United States-Mexico agreement has been in effect for almost 6 years now, but relations have been rocky, to say the least, since President Donald Trump started his trade war. Just recently, he warned he'd slap a 100% tariff on Canada if it made a trade deal with China. And he doesn't seem convinced that Canada and Mexico have much to offer.
You know, we don't need cars made in Canada. We don't need cars made in Mexico. We want to make them here.
So, does he want to keep CUSMA or not? With the three countries heading back to the table to review it, we're going to find out in the coming months whether the largest free trade region in the world has a future. To help break this down, I spoke with Colin Robertson, Senior Advisor and Fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. He also served on the NAFTA implementation team. And Martha Hall Findlay, Director of the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary and former Liberal MP for the riding of Toronto-Willowdale. They are both members of Carleton University's expert group on Canada-US relations. Colin, Martha, great to have you on the show. How are you both doing?
Oh,
great. Good to be with you, Jan.
Thank you, and it's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's start off. As we know, the upcoming CUSMA joint review are talks about changes to the agreement and possibly extending it to 2052. Colin, how does Canada approach these talks if it suspects that the U.S. is negotiating perhaps in bad faith?
Well, you have to take them seriously, even if we think they're negotiating in bad faith, because this agreement accounts for 75% of our exports to the world and about 60% of our imports. It is our preponderant trading relationship. And as you know, we're trying to diversify trade, but this is still the most important market for us. And you can't change geography, and whatever happens, it's still going to be a major market for Canada.
Martha?
A slightly different perspective, I think. One, I think it's worth remembering that this was not ever supposed to be a renegotiation. This was just supposed to be a review to determine whether to extend it even further than it otherwise would. Of course, you know, that would open the opportunity to have discussions, but Donald Trump has been treating this as if it isn't the law, and it isn't the law of our two countries, and it is. And so the very fact that we're all now accepting that this is going to be renegotiation feels a little bit like we've fallen into their trap. And I would argue this was the deal that Donald Trump the last time around said was the best deal ever, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a massive challenge in terms of trust. I don't know how much so-called renegotiation is going to get us anything that we can count on. So we have to just be really, really careful. I think, you know, Colin, you and I have both heard this. We must take Donald Trump seriously, but we can't take him literally. But the other part of where I might differ a little bit is, yeah, it's the relationship with the United States, 75% of our exports. But, you know, we had a pretty decent economy before the free trade agreement was signed. We had a pretty good, we have great relationships with an awful lot of Americans in different parts of the country, if you recognize that this isn't just an Ottawa, DC thing. Yeah, it's important. It's a really important deal for us, but it's not the end of the world. And I think we have to be really conscious of the fact that Canada, you know, we're not going to live or die on this. And I think if we keep saying that, we're almost going to be giving Trump more,
well,
more leeway, if you will.
With that being said, Colin, I am curious, you know, if these are just reviews and perhaps not negotiations, some people might feel that is the case. And they're curious, what are the changes or adjustments that you suspect the U.S. might be looking at?
Oh, I think the Americans are going to come at us. We pretty much know from the hearings they've held, and the United States Trade Representative publishes a list every year of the irritants. So it's our supply management for dairy products. It's they may go after our banking services. They may go after culture. They may want to put, they're certainly going to go after the auto trade. They've already begun this. Keep in mind, we're already engaged in negotiations as a result of tariffs already imposed on forest products, steel, aluminum, and auto parts. So we know where they're coming from. And I think I would agree with Martha. I think for now they're playing us, but I think what we're seeing, as Martha says, this is all part of a game. And I think the best playbook that we can look at is the art of the deal, Trump's art of the deal. It's to use leverage, intimidate, bully, harass, and that's what we're seeing. So, but we, on our part, because it is so important for us, keep calm, carry on, be patient, but keep in mind, this may not work out. And so we should be planning on a plan B. I think the Prime Minister's already put that forward in terms of trade diversification, building at home, and particularly doing it work at home. The premiers are meeting today. I think they need to take on internal trade barriers. That's still unfinished business at Confederation, but we still have to have some kind of an arrangement with the United States if we can, but we may not get it.
Well, we'll get to the premiers, but Colin, I do want to stick with you. Is it fair to say that you believe this deal won't go through?
Right now, I'm doubtful.
Why?
Because I think we don't settle for a bad deal. And I think with the way the Americans are pressuring us today, it would be a bad deal. The Europeans experienced this after Tariff Day in April, and they're all got buyer's remorse today. We responded with retaliatory tariffs. So we and the Chinese, we've since lifted them in part to stay at the table, and that hasn't really done us a lot of good. We pulled back the digital services tax. Again, I think he's playing us.
Martha Sayman, does CUSMA survive here?
I think the relationship between the two countries absolutely survives. What it ultimately looks like, as I said, we had a very, very close relationship before the free trade agreement was signed in the 80s. Has that, and then NAFTA, and then now the USMCA CUSMA been good for both economies? Yes. So yeah, it'd be great to keep it. There are two aspects to this. I think time is Canada's ally. I think by far our biggest allies are in fact the Americans, the American businesses. If we say 75% of our exports go to the United States, well, that means there are a whole lot of people relying on Canadian supplies of various things, and in some cases really important things like potash and uranium and cars is a bit of a separate thing because of the auto pack, and of course our energy and oil and gas. But that's an important source of supply for so many Americans, American businesses. When they have to buy aluminum or steel at an inflated price because of tariffs, that hurts their business. So my view is our biggest allies in this whole I hate to use the word negotiation because it's not supposed to be one, but in this whole discussion, time is on our side, and Americans and American businesses are on our side because it's beneficial to them. And the Prime Minister said we're not going to sign a bad deal. Better to have no deal than have a bad deal, and I have to agree with that.
All right, Martha, I want to stick with you. Colin had brought up the premiers meeting with Mark Carney today. What role? I mean, we've heard the premier here in Ontario be quite vocal. We have heard the premier in Ottawa, in Alberta rather, be quite vocal. What role do the provinces and the premiers play in these talks?
Well, what role they shouldn't play is one-offs. This is a challenge, and we do occasionally have different premiers going out and speaking about things international when really it should be a collaborative effort to support whatever we say, but with one voice. I would say the biggest role the premiers have here is there are two big roles. One is to continue to work those relationships that we already have, where we're a supplier, where we're customer. The Western states, for example, the ag, the energy, working with the governors, their counterparts in the states, working with, but this doesn't have to be a political rah-rah. It just means continue to work with the people who understand the importance of this arrangement and continue to maintain those good relations. Not all Americans are supportive of what Donald Trump is doing, so we need to continue to maintain those relationships. And I think the other key role for the provinces and the provincial premiers is let's get our own house in order. I mean, we still have interprovincial trade barriers. I mean, without naming names, we did have one premier get up and say, we're just going to get rid of all of our internal trade barriers, and within a few weeks passed a budget that gave preferential tax treatment to the local breweries. I mean, you just can't say and then not do. So I really think the provinces have a role to play here in, a bit of water in their wine, a little bit of, less politics and more, can we just figure this out? And it's a moment in time. Like, if we don't take this opportunity now to address some of these internal problems, then shame on us.
Colin, there has been a lot of focus on what happens if the U.S., pardon my language, negotiations walk away from these negotiations. But is there a situation where Canada decides, you know what, this is not for us, we're going to take a step away from the table?
Yes, we did that in the very first negotiations with Simon Reisman as our chief negotiator, really around dispute settlement. So we walked away, and at the clock stopped. We had to stop the clock on the very last day because, again, it came down to dispute settlement, and it ended up with Derek Burney and Mike Wilson saying, well, we're going to walk away, and James Baker, then Secretary of the Treasury, being told that they were going to phone Brian Mulroney and have him phone Ronald Reagan in California where he was spending the weekend. And Baker came back and said, okay, but you got to get this through Congress, which we did. So no, it's going to be difficult, and it'll probably go extra innings. The NAFTA was much easier to do, but certainly the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, as I say, we walked out for several weeks, and then at the end of the day, we had to stop the clock.
Martha had sort of touched on how important CUSMA is to the Canadian economy. You had mentioned the 75%, the 65%. Just give us a sense, if this deal does not stand, does not get picked up, what does it mean for the Canadian economy? Colin.
Well, it means we're going to pay tariffs. We may be paying tariffs in any event, probably 10 to 15%, depending on the capriciousness of Donald Trump in any day. But so that means we still have the advantage of proximity and geography and existing supply chains, but it means a tax on American consumers and a tax on Canadians.
Martha?
Totally agree. But to put things into perspective, even with the tariffs that we have now, there are some sectors that are clearly suffering. Steel, aluminum, who knows, the auto stuff is so up in the air. I mean, that industry is so integrated. A car, given all of its components, ultimately goes across the border a number of times. So that's complicated, but it's complicated, but for our benefit and for the American benefit, we can't change geography. And even though some industries have been hit harder, like I said, overall, the economists are saying that overall the tariff hit for the overall Canadian economy is less than 5%. And we've actually been picking up steam in terms of our economic activity. I think, having a confidence in oneself is also really important. That sends very strong messages. I go back to, we need to work with the governors, we need to work with the business interests. Guaranteed there are significant business interests right now that are not happy with what Donald Trump is doing. And at some point, he's going to have to recognize that that includes a lot of voters.
Martha, you mentioned complicated. Help me understand, how does Canada, as we've seen with the deals it is striking as Mark Carney is traveling, making a deal with China, how does the Prime Minister balance making these deals while knowing full well that there are threats that are probably looming when he touches back into North America from Donald Trump with 100% tariff threats? How do you make those deals while trying to diversify?
Well, this is, take Trump seriously, but not literally. If he were to impose 100% tariffs, the American businesses would be up in arms. I mean, this is not going to happen. And notice he hasn't actually followed through. And to stress the diversification thing, there are two aspects to that. One is a political positioning to basically say, look, we are confident in Canada. We're going to work with other partners. We're going to expand our economic alternatives. There will never be a day when we only trade with China instead of the United States. The geography is there, the interconnectedness of our businesses. We're going to continue to have massive trade between our two countries. For me, the diversification effort it's not a replacement, it's an add-on, because frankly, our economy could do with more activity, and we could do with not relying on one customer or one supplier. So these efforts are actually in addition to what we already have with the United States. They're not to they're not to replace it. And frankly, I think this has been as a wake-up call to Canadians and Canadian businesses and Canadian politicians, forcing us to look at other alternatives, to diversify, not to replace the American arrangement, but to add to it, I think is a very important thing for us to do.
Colin, what can Canada learn from the trade deal that was reached by the European Union and the US just last year?
Well, don't jump when you don't have to. I think they leapt
Right.
and they have buyer's remorse. But I think what we really have to do, and so it would be to first of all deal with the internal trade barriers in Canada, and secondly find out, get our resources out of the ground, process them, and then sell them abroad. So I think we've got a lot of work to do at home. I think that the game starts with ourselves, and then we can deal with the rest. The diversification of trade is fine, but as Martha says, this is a shakeup of our complacency, but also a reminder that we can do an awful lot at home ourselves to make ourselves more productive.
Martha,
Indeed, our
why
biggest-
yeah, why
the biggest
buyer's
challenge
remorse?
facing Canada right now, I think the biggest challenge facing us right now is a slide back into complacency. This is the state of attitude right now in Canada is a huge opportunity. We have alignment and all across political parties that we need to diversify, that we need to build our trade infrastructure, that we need to get rid of interprovincial trade barriers. We need to deal with the regulatory overburden. And I say that on purpose. I'm not going to say some regulation is actually really good and really important, but we have too much. We have overlap. We have an incredible time of political agreement on some of these things. The worst thing that we could do is to slide back into complacency without actually taking off this opportunity.
Colin, we have 1 minute left. Last question to you. Martha had mentioned a little bit of sort of where Canada needs to go or who to look to in terms of our allies here. If Canada wants CUSMA to continue, who are the allies in the U.S.?
Oh, it's anybody who's doing business with Canada. It's both those who buy from us and those who sell to us. Our reckoning is there's about 8 million jobs. Can't lobby and give to campaigns, but we can do is go in and see each legislator by district and point out, here's the Canadian investment in your district that creates jobs. Here are the companies in your district that are selling to Canada or buying parts from Canada, which we then further manufacture. So as Martha said, we've got all sorts of allies, and that's what we have to do is have a full all court press. And it's more than the embassy, more than the prime minister. It's the premiers, the legislators, it's business people. Anybody doing business in the States has got to remind their suppliers or the people they're buying from vendors that this is important to them and tell them to address their congressman. That message will get through to the White House.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it.
Listen to.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it. Colin, really appreciate it. Martha, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your insights.
No, great
Thanks,
to be here.
Jan.
Thank you.